Hello and welcome everyone to the Environment Primer series of Drishti IAS English. My name is Pragya. In today's interesting episode of Environment Primer, we are going to talk about one of the most significant and important conventions in the field of environment. The title of our today's discussion is the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. So as you all are aware, and you might be hearing it in the news as well, that yes, we are losing our natural flora and fauna at an unprecedented rate. So that is why we need to accelerate our efforts towards the protection of the natural biodiversity. And biodiversity conservation is very important from the perspective of your prelims examination, because when we were discussing the trend analysis for environment, we saw that yes, around 8 to 9 questions are asked from the topic of biodiversity and its conservation. So yes, this topic is very important from the prelims perspective. So in this discussion today, we are firstly going to talk about what is the Convention on Biological Diversity, also known as the CBD. Then we are also going to discuss the IKI targets. Then we are also going to study about the Global Biodiversity Framework that has been adopted at the COP15 recently. Then we are also going to see some of the criticism of this Convention on Biological Diversity. Okay, and lastly we are going to discuss some of the important questions from the perspective of your prelims examination. So before we begin with our session today, I would firstly like to inform you about the 40% discount that is going on, the holy sale that is going on IAS GS Foundation course. So to avail the discount, you can click on the link that is given in the description box. The EMI facility is also available and the discount is valid from 21st to 24th March. So you can download the Drishti Learning app or you can click on the link given in the description box below to avail of the discount. So firstly, we are going to talk about the background of our today's topic. So the recent edition of the COP15 was held at Montreal, Canada. And this was held in the year 2022. So post 2020, when IKI targets finished at 2020, we realized that yes, we were not able to achieve even a single target, a single IKI target at a global level. So that is why there was a need to create a new declaration. There was a need to create a new framework, and the countries at COP15 arrived at a historical environmental agreement, which we will be studying about in our further slides. But is this effort enough? Are we trying to accelerate our efforts? Because no country has achieved the biodiversity targets. Okay, so yes, this is a cause of worry. And are these targets achievable even? So all of this we are going to try to figure out in our today's session. Okay, so let us begin firstly by discussing what is the Convention on Biological Diversity. So see, we need to stop the loss of our biodiversity. Loss of our biodiversity. We need to stop the great extinction that is ongoing in our natural flora and fauna. So basically, CBD is an international agreement for conserving biodiversity with the vision of living in harmony with nature by 2050, and it was adopted at the Earth Summit, also known as the Rio Earth Summit, in the year 1992, and it came into force in the year 1993. So basically, the primary aim of this convention is to conserve biological diversity, promote sustainable use of its components, and ensure fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from genetic resources. So for example, there is a pharmaceutical company in Europe and which is using the medicinal properties of plants that are available in the state of Tamil Nadu in India. So all the stakeholders are to be benefited through the development of that drug by the European pharmaceutical company. So basically it is saying that yes, accelerate the global efforts towards the conservation and protection of biological diversity. Moving forward, parties to the convention commit to developing national strategies and action plans for biodiversity conservation. It emphasizes the importance of protecting ecosystems, species and genetic diversity, recognizing their crucial role in sustaining life on Earth. Because a healthy ecosystem is required to sustain the life on Earth, is required to mitigate the climate change we are facing, is required to sustain the natural flora and fauna on Earth, because without that the human life is not possible on Earth. And if we will talk about the great extinction, so according to the estimate of the IUCN red list of species, red list of threatened species, around 1 million species are on the verge of extinction. So this is why we are saying that yes, this is a great extinction which we will be facing, and that will be detrimental to everything, to Earth, to humans and to our efforts towards the mitigation of climate change. And that is why the countries are very serious as of now to mitigate any kind of climate change that is happening, any kind of threat that is happening to our natural flora and fauna. The CBD operates through various mechanisms, including the conferences of the parties. So it has its own conference of party which meets around every 2 years. Okay, so this is different from the conference of parties that happens every year. So this is a conference of party especially dedicated to the biodiversity, and it meets every 2 years. The headquarters of CBD are in Montreal, Canada. Okay, and it also has subsidiary bodies and national focal points for its enforcement. And if you talk about the signatory countries, so basically 196 countries have signed the CBD except USA. Although USA is indirectly a part of the CBD, but it has not ratified the CBD. So this CBD is the most widely ratified environmental convention, and it is a legally binding convention. That means if you will violate this convention, you will be liable for sanctions under the international law. Moving forward, let us discuss the IKI targets. So basically the IKI targets adopted during the 2010 CBD summit in Nagoya, located in Japan's Aichi prefecture, included goals such as reducing deforestation by at least half during the coming decade and curbing pollution so that it no longer harm the ecosystems. But as I have informed to you before also, not even a single IKI target was achieved when the assessment happened in the year 2020, because in 2020 was the threshold year for the achievement of IKI targets. So the timeline period was 2010 to 2020, and there were 20 specifically given targets to the nations, and they were quite achievable in nature. But sadly, no country has fulfilled their biodiversity conservation targets. So the targets cover various aspects of biodiversity conservation and sustainable use, including reducing habitat loss, controlling invasive species and safeguarding ecosystem services. So you all know that what are the major threats to the biodiversity as of now: human interference, habitat loss, climate change, etc. Okay, threat of invasive species. So all of these were targeted by the IKI targets, and they wanted to conserve the natural flora and fauna by reduction of these human interferences, by reduction of habitat loss, by developing their habitats, by saving them from invasive species, etc. Moving forward, each target included specific measurable goals to be achieved by 2020. So this is what I am explaining to you, that these goals were not something that the countries were not able to achieve, okay. But the problem with them was they were very vague in nature. Okay, and they did not have a clear-cut enforcement measure. And that is why most probably the countries were not able to achieve these goals. But if we want to achieve all of our sustainable development goals by the year 2030, we really need to accelerate our efforts towards the conservation of biodiversity, towards the reduction of this great extinction that is happening as of now. So nearly all parties created these strategies, most were never fully implemented due to the lack of the will of the parties to implement the IKE targets. Now moving forward, this is a pictorial representation. So these targets were divided into 4 stages, that is the strategic goal A, goal B, goal C, goal D and goal E. Okay. So the first goal was to address the underlying causes of biodiversity law by mainstreaming biodiversity across government and society. Then reduce the direct pressures on biodiversity and promote sustainable use. So sustainable development was the main focal point of the IKE targets. Then to improve the status of biodiversity by safeguarding ecosystem, species and genetic diversity, enhance the benefits to all from biodiversity and ecosystem services, and then enhance implementation through participatory planning, knowledge management and capacity building. But the sad part is nothing has been fulfilled as of now. Now let us move forward to discuss the Global Biodiversity Framework that was adopted at the COP15 edition. That happened in the year 2022 at Montreal, Canada. So basically, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework 2021 was signed, and it is often referred to the Paris Moment for biodiversity because we are trying to achieve what we have promised to ourselves through the Paris Agreement, that yes, we will reduce the temperature, we will limit the rise in global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, that is our ideal target, and we are trying to limit it not at the speed of 2 degrees Celsius. So we are just trying to limit it, okay, and that is why it is known as the Paris Moment, because we are trying to reciprocate the Paris Agreement for biodiversity, and it represents a historic accord where 196 countries, excluding notably the USA, committed to a transformative agreement because the IKE targets ended in the year 2020. So we realized that yes, now we need a new agreement, and we developed the Global Biodiversity Framework in the COP15. And this landmark deal outlines 4 primary objectives and 23 specific targets for 2030. So what was the complaint about the IKE targets? That they were very vague in nature, and that is why this Global Biodiversity Framework has specific targets. They are not vague in nature. But let us see what happens. Are we able to achieve these targets by 2030? That is still questionable. That is still the time will tell. Okay, moving forward. The aim, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework aims to halt and reverse biodiversity loss by 2030 while respecting the rights of indigenous and local communities. It encompasses 4 main goals, that is conservation, sustainable use, equitable sharing of benefit and finance and capacity building. So basically, when you will study about the key highlights of the COP15, you will see that they have agreed on into the 30 into 30 target. And what is this 30 into 30 target? That is, they will protect 30% of the land and 30% of the coastal and marine ecosystem. Coastal and marine ecosystem by the year 2030. Okay, So they will not only protect the 30% land and 30% marine and coastal ecosystem, they are also trying to revive the land degradation by 30%. They are also trying to revive the oceans and coastal marine ecosystems that we have already lost by the year 2030. And for this, there is an huge requirement of finances as well. It demands an investment of US dollar 200 million, and India at COP15 has said that the global south countries also need to have a separate fund, because most of the developing countries lack fund in dealing with climate change. Okay, they are not as technologically sound and as economically sound as the developed countries, and that is why India has pressed that yes, you need to have a new fund for the achieving these targets, and this demand was raised by India at the COP15. Okay, so this was all about the global biodiversity framework. Moving forward, this is the pictorial representation of the global biodiversity policy framework for 2013. So the role of the financial and business sector, rethinking the singular use of landscape, transformative change, global scenarios to halt and restore nature, whole of society approach towards restoring nature, and the role of cities in New Deal of Nature, because we are going for development at an unprecedented scale. But are we actually following the sustainable development? That is still questionable in nature. So basically it is asking the countries that okay, develop, we don't mind you developing, but follow the sustainable method of development, follow the concept of smart cities. Okay, make your cities such that they are sustainably important, they are not causing any further environmental damage. Okay, so all of these are the targets of the global biodiversity policy. We also have the global biodiversity fund for investment in the climate action goals that we have set for the year 2030. If you talk about the COP15, China alone has placed $200 million, okay, for the development of the environment, for the restoration of the environment. COP15 happened under the presidency of China. In fact, not only China, the other developed countries such as US, etc. are also pledging that yes, we are trying to restore the environmental damage we have done. Okay. Now let us understand why this Convention on Biological Diversity is being criticized. Okay, so the critics argue that CBD implementation faces challenges due to resistance from Western nation to its pro-South provisions. So basically CBD talked about the differential responsibilities. So the developed countries argue that these kind of environmental conventions have a biasness towards the developing country. They are making us liable, still making us liable for the historical things. And now so we are protecting the environment. So why are you making us liable this much? So yes, they face resistance from Western nations because they favor the South nations, the developing nations. Okay. Some view it as a strong agreement that softened during execution. So some critics argue that yes, although the agreement was legally binding, but are we taking any action for its non-implementation? No, it is very soft in its execution efforts. Okay, calls for enforcing it as a binding multilateral agreement gain support with monitoring violations and non-compliance by the COP. Okay, despite the convention's assertion of covering all forms of life, reports from participating nations indicate a gap in reality. That means it is dedicated to just protecting one form of life and not all form of lives, and this is a gap that is happening, that we are just focusing on one kind of life form and we are not focusing on other kind of life forms. So these are the some of the criticisms against the Convention on Biological Diversity. Any which ways, it is a very important and widely ratified convention on biodiversity. It has its own successes and roles to play. the COP parties time and again review its progress, and and we are very much committed as of now. If you talk about this 2024, definitely you are going to see some of the huge actions on the protection of biodiversity, because countries these days are very serious about mitigation of climate change, protecting their own biological diversity. Okay, so yes, despite the loopholes, it is a very significant and important environmental convention. So with this, we come to a conclusion of our today's discussion. We have discussed the CBD, we have discussed the IKI targets, and we have discussed the recently formulated historical environmental agreement known as the Global Biodiversity Framework that was signed at the COP15. Now let us move forward to discuss some of the important practice questions from our today's session. So the question is, consider the following statements. So statement number 1 is, the Convention on Biological Diversity, also known as the CBD, was adopted during the Earth Summit held in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. Your statement number 2 is, India enacted the Biological Diversity Act in 2002 to give effect to the provisions of the CBD conventions. So which of the above statements are correct? Your options are, option A is 1 only, option B is 2 only, option C is both 1 and 2, and option D is none of the above. So yes, both of these statements are correct. India has enacted the Biological Diversity Act to give effect to the CBD provisions, and it was adopted during the Earth Summit, as I have mentioned in my today's session. Now let us discuss another question. So the question is, with reference to the Convention on Biological Diversity, consider the following statements. Your statement number 1 is, sharing the benefits arising from the utilization of genetic resources in a fair and equitable way is one of the objectives of the CBD. Your statement number 2 is, the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety is an agreement under the aegis of the Convention on Biological Diversity. So which of the following statements are correct? Your options are, option A is 1 only, option B is 2 only, option C is both 1 and 2, and option D is none of the above. And this answer will be given by you to me in the comment section below. Okay, I hope this session was insightful for you. If you have any feedback regarding this session, you can drop it in the comment box below. If you liked today's discussion and found it to be helpful, kindly like the video and subscribe to our channel for more such interesting updates. Thank you.
For more informative content, like, share and subscribe, and do not forget to press the bell icon to get the notifications.